We often visualize ancient Athens as a sun-drenched landscape of marble and rhetoric, the specific territory of Attica, where a new political focus on liberty, equality, and security first took shape. This system combined two Greek concepts, demos, the people, and kratos, meaning power or force. In a departure from the traditional rule of aristocratic councils, the city-state transferred the authority for legislation and executive bills directly to its citizens. To project the glory of this new system, the Athenians built monumental structures. The Parthenon, crowning the city, stands as the physical proof of a wealthy, confident society. Alongside this architectural boom came a cultural expansion. Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides invented the theatrical tragedy, exploring human nature and morality on stage in ways that are still performed today. This demographic chart highlights the limits of that citizenship. Because of birth-based criterion, excluded women, foreign residents, and a massive enslaved population, political power rested with a small fraction of inhabitants. Out of hundreds of thousands, only 30,000 men could vote. For that eligible minority, political participation was a physical requirement. Here at the Pnyx, an open-air gathering space, the assembly, or ecclesia, would meet. Athenians didn't elect representatives to make laws for them. Any citizen could stand on those steps, argue a point, and vote directly on state policy by a simple show of hands. When it came to filling administrative offices, they rarely held elections. Elections, they argued, naturally favored the wealthy and famous. Instead, they used a system called sortition. They selected magistrates and council members at random, by lottery. The idea was that any citizen was equally capable of serving the state. This direct participation extended into the legal system. The Athenian courts, known as the dikasteria, didn't use professional judges or lawyers. A single trial could be decided by a jury of 500 or even up to 6,000 ordinary citizens. They listened to the litigants, voted without deliberation, and delivered final verdicts with no option for appeal. Running a city where thousands of men spend their days debating legislation and sitting on juries requires an enormous amount of free time. That leisure was entirely provided by enslaved labor. Captured in wars or bought from abroad, enslaved people worked the silver mines, ran the farms, and managed the households. The civic participation we study today was completely dependent on the subjugation of this massive underclass. A citizen could only dedicate his life to the state because someone else was forced to do his work. Even with forced labor, sustaining this machine was expensive. Athens paid its citizens a daily wage just to show up for jury duty and assembly meetings. Add the costs of monumental marble temples, and the math of the Golden Age stops adding up. To find the money, we have to look across the Aegean Sea. After fighting off Persian invasions, dozens of Greek city-states formed a mutual defense alliance called the Delian League. Each member contributed ships or money to a shared treasury on the neutral island of Delos. Over time, Athens' massive navy dominated the alliance. In 454 BC, they unilaterally moved the communal treasury from Delos directly to Athens, claiming it was for safekeeping. Under the leadership of the prominent statesman Pericles, Athens began siphoning those allied defense funds. Pericles used the extorted money to pay for the daily functioning of the democracy and to finance his massive building program on the Acropolis. When other city-states realized they were paying for Athenian monuments and tried to leave the League, the response was swift and violent. Athens used its navy to blockade, conquer, and sometimes execute the populations of rebellious allies. The alliance had morphed into an empire. The political liberty and architectural wonders enjoyed by the citizens of Athens were financed by running a brutal protection racket across the Mediterranean. As Athens expanded its reach and its wealth, anxiety rippled through the rest of Greece. City-states watched the Athenian navy dominate trade routes and crush dissent. The most alarmed spectator was Sparta. Sparta operated as an oligarchy, led by two kings. Their entire society was organized around extreme military discipline, largely to maintain control over their own captive population of laborers, the Helots. The two powers were completely incompatible. You had an aggressive, volatile maritime empire spreading its influence, pushing up against a deeply conservative, heavily armed land power. This friction between two opposing models of government and Athens' refusal to curb its imperial ambitions ignited the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that would tear the Greek world apart. Decades of brutal warfare eventually broke the Athenian state. As military defeats piled up and a devastating plague swept through the city, the democratic machine buckled under the pressure, descending into paranoia and factionalism. The system had a built-in mechanism for this kind of anxiety, called ostracism. Once a year, citizens could scratch a name onto a piece of broken pottery, an ostracon. If a man received enough votes, he was exiled from the city for 10 years, no trial or criminal charges required. It was designed to prevent tyrants, but it easily weaponized into a popularity contest. This unchecked crowd psychology led to disastrous decisions. In 406 BC, the Athenian navy won a massive victory at Arginusae, but a severe storm prevented the commanders from rescuing the surviving sailors. Enraged by the loss of life, the assembly bypassed legal procedure and voted to execute 6 of their own victorious generals in a single day. The mob mentality peaked in 399 BC. A jury of 500 citizens voted to execute Socrates, a man whose only crime was asking persistent, uncomfortable questions that challenged the state's traditional beliefs. These volatile moments led thinkers like Plato and Thucydides to characterize the system as a reckless collective tyranny of the poor over the wealthy. They observed the assembly and concluded that a government driven by the unguided will of the masses was inherently unstable and prone to manipulation. By the 4th century, even the Athenians began to curtail the assembly's power, shifting legislative responsibility to specialized juror panels and legal reviews. This transition left behind a record of a society constantly struggling to balance the raw, often impulsive power of the people against the necessity of stable, enduring law.